Hi, welcome to the BOK video training series. Today, we're going to focus on how to paint an interior wall the BOK way. I'm also going to be giving you important tips and tricks on how to save time while achieving the professional results we're after. Step one is to put drop cloths on the floor. Cover anything that might possibly be in the way. If there's a table and it has things on it, maybe the homeowner's belongings, cover that with a drop cloth too. There's no reason why we should be dripping paint on the floor, even if it's a hardwood floor. I've had painters tell me, oh, it's no big deal, you can just scrape it up with your thumbnail. Well, yeah, but you know what, that's not very professional, and it just takes extra time. It takes a matter of seconds to put down a drop cloth, move them around as you need, just put down the drop cloths, and you'll end up with a much better job. The next step, and one that drives me absolutely crazy, is remove the face plates. You just might as well. It takes 2 seconds. If the house is not occupied, you can take the faceplate off and lay it right on the floor. If you're going to be painting that room the same day, then you just put it right back up. But the bottom line is, take the faceplates off. There's no reason to try to paint around them or try to cut at an edge or tape them or anything silly like that. Remove the faceplates and then keep the color off of the fixture itself. The next step is to remove all the window coverings. If there's any draperies, take the draperies down and remove the screws completely. Take all of the hardware off the wall. For blinds that are going to be reinstalled, still recommend, really must, take the blinds down. When taking the blinds down, make sure that you raise the blinds all the way to their highest position, remove the blinds carefully, wrap them up and put them aside. I'll show you. These little clips are very, very delicate. They're all just a little bit different, but these are fairly common. This is called a valance, and the valance basically just clips in, and all you really need to do is to just push your finger in here, push down on it, and it pops right out. If they break, we're going to have to find new ones, so try not to break them. These little devices, you simply just push them up on the bottom, slide that out, and lift it out as straight as you can. Same thing for the other side. And then what I usually do is raise it all the way up, let it catch, and then I always wrap the strings. Keep them nice and clean and out of the way so that you don't break the blinds. Then all we'll do is take a screwdriver or a drill and remove the brackets from the wall. The next step is to fill any nail holes. To do that, we're just going to use just a small amount of spackle. There's no need to use any fancy device. Just use your finger, put a little bit of spackle right into the hole, rub it around a little bit. It'll dry in a matter of seconds. The next step is to assess the corner between the wall and the ceiling. What we're looking for is if there is any extraneous color on the ceiling. If there's any color on the ceiling at all, then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to touch up the ceiling and that corner first. It makes for a much sharper line and a much better finished product. If for some reason you're going to need to find some match paint for the ceiling, here's a little tip and trick. Light fixtures like this one right here probably are going to be painted underneath. The light fixture was probably the last thing to be installed, so if you carefully remove the light fixture, you can almost certainly remove a small piece of the ceiling paint and use that to match. Believe it or not, most ceilings are not bright white the way you would expect. Most times, ceiling paint is not actually bright white, so that's something to be very careful about. If you're going to remove any ceiling fixtures in order to get the match paint, it's very rare that the sun will ever have hit the ceiling, so you're not going to have any fading, and you can almost certainly get a perfect match. Also, the paint is probably going to be flat, and flat paint is a lot easier to match than any type of machine. Now that all the prep work's out of the way, it's time to start painting. The first step is to cut a nice sharp line at the top of the wall by the ceiling and around all of the baseboards and doors and windows. Here's a helpful tip for you. To get a nice sharp line, I really like these edging tools. Now, they're both very inexpensive, but believe it or not, I prefer the less expensive version, and here's why. This one's got some nice fancy little things. You can flip the wheels up. You can hook it up to a pole. There's all sorts of little bells and whistles on this little device, but it doesn't work very well in my opinion because you get paint on this and next thing you know, you have paint on your ceiling. I like this one. It's just simpler, it's easier, and I'll show you some good techniques on how to use it. This will save you a bunch of time and get you a nice professional result if you know how to use it properly. What I like to do when I'm using this edging tool is I like to have paint in a rolling pan, even if I'm not ready to roll yet. And then what I'll do is I'll just dab the tool till it's nice and wet, and then find a spot where I can drag a little bit of excess off onto the edge of the rolling pan. You want to have enough paint, especially at the top here, to where you've got a nice wet edge, but you don't want it to where it's going to be dripping all over the floor. One of the reasons I prefer this particular kind of pad is because it doesn't have a lot of extra stuff for paint to get caught on. It does have rollers that will roll up against the ceiling, and you want to make sure that you keep those nice and clean. If you get a little paint on it, usually you just take your finger and wipe it right back off, but you want to check your rollers on a regular basis. Also, when you get into a corner, this can be helpful, but again, it can actually track some paint on it as well. So what I'll do is I'll use the roller on the inside corner. I'll show you that in a second, and then I'll flip it around and use the other side to put paint into the corner. What I do is I start just about an inch below the ceiling or the edge that I'm going to be painting towards, and I move my tool up to the spot. And what that does is it makes sure that you're not going to get any paint on the ceiling. And then if you have enough paint on the edge, you'll get a nice straight line. And then notice I drop it down every time before I go back up to the ceiling. So what I'll do is I'll start with the edging and have someone help me start with the rolling. But we always want to make sure that the edging is done before the rolling. Otherwise, it can be a real problem. So while this edging tool is a real time saver, it's not always perfect. And sometimes, no matter how much you inspect, you might need to use a brush to touch up the very top edge. I also use a brush to hit the corners because the edger won't always catch all the way into the corner. It's better not to have extra paint to force the paint into the corner. With the edging tool, just use the brush instead. One of the biggest mistakes that I see with painting with a brush is not having visibility of the actual edge of the brush. You can't work over your head to the point where you can't see your line. So I will change my body position, my height, adjust whatever I need to do so that I can make sure that I see exactly what I'm touching. The next step is to roll the walls with an N pattern rolling technique. The N pattern technique is a technique I learned when I was in the billboard business, watching these guys paint massive billboards in no time at all. I promise it works. Try it, you'll like it. When rolling with a fresh roller, you just want to roll the roller down into the paint to where you get a nice little drip. You don't want to dunk it completely in there because then you'll get paint all over the sides and the edges, and it just drips a whole lot more. So I do that a couple times till I guess it can get a nice drip all the way around. And you want to make sure that you're spinning the roller, you're not just dragging it down back and forth. And once you have your paint on your roller, I always twist it just to keep any drips from forming. Bring it over to the wall, and then here's the N pattern. You ready? Draw an N, and then you roll it right back across. And when you first put the paint on a brand new roller, you're not going to get very good coverage, so I'll quickly return to the pan, give ourselves some more paint. Again, twist it, and then do it one more time. Now you've got good, solid coverage, and then you roll it right back across. If you read the manufacturer's instructions on paint, they always say to maintain a wet edge. What they're referring to is this spot right here. And so, as opposed to this spot over here, where it's not a wet edge. So what we'll do is we'll keep rolling from that same spot so that we maintain a wet edge. If you're covering a dark color, obviously you want to try to get as good a coverage as you can on your first coat. That way your second coat will go even better. See, I'm not going all the way to the edge. I don't really want to drag the end of the roller up against the pre-painted edge. And I want to go back to about where I started, because I've got some wetness right there that needs to be rolled back in. What I see a lot of painters do for the very first time is they just sort of go up and down like this a bunch of times, and it just takes forever. The end pattern makes things much faster. When rolling up high, one of the things we want to try to avoid at all cost is bouncing up against the ceiling. So same tip as far as painting up towards the ceiling. We want to always make sure we can see the top of the roller, because if you can't see the roller, you might accidentally bump up against the ceiling and get stray paint on the ceiling, and that can be a real problem for touch-up, especially if you don't have any match paint for the ceiling. So just roll to where you've got about 2 inches or so and stop, and then roll yourself back. The next step is to inspect the wall for painter's holidays. A holiday is basically just a small little piece of mist paint, just needs to be rolled again or touched up with a brush. It happens to every painter, but you need to inspect very carefully to make sure there's no painter's holidays. Regardless of how good a painter you are, you're still going to need to second coat. Not sure if it's easy to see, but I'm putting on a pretty thick coat. Again, with this dark color, it's definitely going to take 2 coats, but the heavier coat you put on the first time, the easier it's going to be to cover perfectly on the second coat. So as you can see, the wall is painted. It still needs a second coat. For the second coat, we want to make sure that we are doing the same steps. So including the edges, we're going to start with the edges, the top, around the door, around the switches and outlets, along the bottom, and then we're going to roll. One of the most noticeable things on a second coat is if you don't redo the edges, you'll end up noticing it and it'll be really, really rough. As you can see, you've got the edges up there which are starting to dry, and you've got the rolled section that's still drying, and you can still see some of the old color coming through, and that's not okay. So now we're going to start the process over again. We're going to start with our edges, we're going to re-roll, and we're going to get a great professional result.